My name is Clara, and I never thought kindness could look so false. I remember hearing about her the first time because everyone in town was talking about how she'd posted those charity photos, you know? Like, she'd set up a whole display of kids in tattered clothes reaching out to her, sunlight glinting off her perfect smile, and it was inspiring. I felt this tug in my chest, like, I wanted to help, too. So I donated, I gave everything I had, because it felt right. My hands were shaking, my heart was pounding as I hit send on the donation page. It was that intense sense of, making a difference. A few days later, I got a thank you email, actually, a live stream invitation. She said she was going to do something special, unbox my gift live on camera, show how my donation was changing lives. My throat went dry thinking about it. I tuned in that evening, candles flickering in the background of my tiny apartment. She appeared with those same kids from the photos, only, something was off. Their clothes looked brand new, the setting was a staged studio, and the kids, they were actors. My jaw locked as I watched her laugh when someone asked a question about where the money really went. She said, "Oh, the real charity happens off camera," and I felt a cold pit open in my stomach. That night, I paced, my chest tight, memories of her radiant face mingling with that disturbed laughter echoing in my head. I called my friend Maya, whispering through trembling lips, "It's all fake, Maya." She tricked me. Maya, protective and fierce, said, "Clara, you deserve better than this, but what can you do?" And I froze, because I had no idea. Over the next week, I replayed the live stream in my mind. Every detail clicked into place. Those candid snapshots on her feed that always looked just a bit too perfect, the way she blocked follow-up questions. My heart twisted between shame and rage. I couldn't sleep, my bones felt hollow. My hands found my phone again and again, hovering over her feed, scrolling through the endless flood of charity updates. My eyes burned. I thought about confronting her directly, but the words stuck in my dry mouth. Why? I wanted to scream, but I only typed and deleted half-formed messages. That sense of betrayal settled in my chest like a stone. I'd trusted her. I'd believed in her smile. And she'd sold my generosity for likes and followers. My cheeks heated thinking about how foolish I'd been. But then something shifted. A spark of, possibility? Like, what if I turned her game around? I started researching live streams, watched tutorials on sharing screens, on going live. My lips curled into a tense smile. I practiced in the mirror, my jaw set, imagining her surprise when her own money hit her account in real time. The idea tasted sweet, like retribution. I felt my pulse quicken, that dreadful excitement that comes right before something both thrilling and terrible. I knew I was crossing a line, but I couldn't stop. Not when she'd fooled me and so many others. One evening, after a few more days of planning, I gathered everything, my laptop, my phone, a list of her bank details I'd pieced together from public posts. My hands trembled so hard I could barely type. But I did. I set up the live stream, hit record, and watched the viewer count tick up as I announced, "Hey everyone, so remember that charity queen who faked her compassion? Well, tonight I'm sending every penny she ever took, from me and thousands like me, back to her. Live." My throat tightened. I could feel my heartbeat in my ears. But as I confirmed the transfer, I realized something weird. I didn't feel triumphant. My jaw was sore from clenching so hard, my stomach churned. The moment the money left my account, it felt like handing her a trophy. Like I'd become the very thing I hated. I ended the stream abruptly and sat there, lights off, screen glowing. My chest heaved in shaky breaths. Part of me was relieved, justice, right? But another part felt empty. And I knew this was only the beginning of something I couldn't quite name. I woke up the next morning with the weight in my chest, like I was carrying stones where my lungs should be. My phone's screen glowed with missed notifications, comments on last night's stream, messages from strangers cheering me on, and one from Maya, "Are you okay?" My hands felt clammy as I tapped out, "I think so, even though every muscle in my body trembled. I stared at the ceiling, pulse hammering, as the memory of that transfer echoed in my mind. It wasn't relief I felt, it was this hollowness, like I'd just watched myself become somebody else. A few hours later, I forced myself to get out of bed. My legs wobbled as I shuffled to the kitchen, brewed coffee with hands so unsteady I spilled grounds on the counter. The smell should have been comforting, but it burnt my nostrils. I paced, heart thudding, like it wanted to break free and run. Every time my phone lit up with another thank you for exposing her, I felt a prick of shame. I'd wanted her to feel the sting of betrayal, but seeing how many people joined in, it made me queasy. By midday, I found myself scrolling through her feed again. There she was, waking up in her designer sheets, smiling at the camera and thanking everyone for supporting real change. I closed my eyes, pressing my palms to my face until I felt my cheekbones. Denial crept in. Maybe it was a glitch, right? Maybe this was her playing the victim, turning the tables on me. I thought of confronting her, but just typing her name made my jaw lock. I texted Maya, "I'm going to do something else." She called almost immediately, concern thick in her voice. "Clara, what are you thinking?" My mouth ran on its own. I want to show the world she's still taking money. I've got enough evidence. Her donation widget is still up. If I flood it with donations, she has to unmask herself. Maya was silent for a moment, then sighed. "Just, be careful, okay? I don't want you to regret this." Her words felt like a lifeline, but I shook my head, more to steady myself than anything else. This has to happen. I spent the afternoon setting up a fresh stream. My apartment was dark, curtains drawn tight. My laptop sat on the edge of the desk, charger plugged in, my phone propped up on a stack of books. Each time I adjusted the camera angle, my knuckles turned white. I practiced my introduction, how I'd start with a shaky voice, then ramp up to calm anger, and finally reveal her ongoing scam. My mouth was dry, my tongue felt swollen, and every time I rehearsed, I licked my lips until they cracked. When evening came, I flicked on a single lamp that cast long shadows across the room. The hush was deafening. I glanced at the donation widget I'd embedded in the stream page, an exact replica of her own. It showed 0, then 1, then 2, as I used test accounts to make tiny donations so the ticker would start. My heart raced, each click felt like a hammer blow in my chest. I imagined her scrolling notifications, seeing the stream title, exposing the charity queen, Liv. I hit go live, and the viewer count began ticking up. It felt unreal, like watching someone else's life play out. My voice broke when I started, "Hey, everyone. You remember her, right?" I swallowed, throat tight, then continued, "The one who posted those photos. Fake the kids." My hands shook so badly the camera wobbled. I paused, took a breath, trying to steady my voice. My chest ached, my jaw hurt from clenching, but I pushed on. "Well, guess what? It's still happening. And right now, you can all send money to her, again." Comments flooded in, shock, outrage, encouragement. The donation ticker jumped to 10, 20, 50. With each new entry, I felt a twist of satisfaction and a deeper dread. This was working. But in the pit of my stomach, I realized something I hadn't at first: I was complicit. I'd become the catalyst for the same cruelty I'd hated. My hands covered my face as the stream played on. I'd wanted her to taste betrayal, but now I tasted it, too. That night, my mind raced with regret and excitement, I guess. I stared at the screen as the donation ticker climbed, each new entry feeling like a dagger and a bomb, all at once. My breathing was ragged, like I'd run a marathon with no finish line in sight. I rubbed my temple, jaw locked, remembering how she'd laughed when someone asked, "Where did the real money go?" My stomach clenched, hot shame rolling through me. Why was I doing this, again? I leaned back, hands cramping from clicking. A few days later, I found myself scrolling through my phone gallery, drawn to those proofs of her lies. I tapped on a screenshot of our messages, the one where she'd replied to my donation with a heart emoji and that smiling face, like she really cared. My fingers trembled as I held it up to the camera for the stream, my nails biting into my palm. Proof 1, screenshot of her heartfelt, "Thank you," reply after my donation. The second proof was a photo of her charity event, kids holding up giant checks with her name printed in gold. They looked posed, their eyes empty. I hesitated before showing each, feeling my pulse thrum. This was my evidence, my truth weapon. But every time I displayed them, I could feel my heart beating against my ribs, and my vision blurred with unshed tears. Proof 2, photo of staged charity event with paid actors. I remember my voice cracking as I said, here's where she really spends our money, fumbling the words, like they tasted sour in my mouth. I held the screenshot of the message up closer, camera trembling, and half expected her to burst through the door of my apartment in that moment. My knees went weak, and I sank onto the floor, laptop balanced on my thighs. My chest heaved as I talked through the proofs, trying to keep it casual, like I wasn't about to unravel. My fingers unconsciously drummed on the wood grain of the floor. I think I laughed through my tears at one point, that ridiculous, shaky laugh when you're so mad at yourself you can't help it. Then, there was this moment of silence, just me, panting, the light flickering over those proofs. I felt my whole body go cold, like I'd stepped into an icy lake. My back pressed against the couch, I clutched the laptop's edge, knuckles white. My breath came out in short, shallow gasps. I realized I wasn't just exposing her anymore, I was exposing myself, my own desperation, my own vulnerability. The irony made my throat tighten. My heart hammered as the stream clock hit 50 minutes. I could see the viewer count plateauing, comments scrolling too fast for me to read. My stomach gave me a vicious jab, that sudden nausea that comes with the worst kind of regret. I fumbled to end the proof segment and switch back to talking head. I raised my hand, palm facing the camera, and whispered, "I thought this would feel like justice, but it tastes hollow." My voice caught and I wiped my wet cheek, pathetic, I thought, but I couldn't stop the tears. That was the moment I knew I was done with proofs. My hands shook as I hit the button to remove the images from the screen. The room fell silent except for my ragged breathing and the hum of the laptop. Part of me wanted to run, get away from the stares, the judgments, from myself. But I stayed. I sat with that proof of my own breaking, like you'd hold a wound under cold water. It was brutal, but it was real. And for the first time since this whole nightmare began, I felt honest. Not righteous, but honest. And that made all the difference. The morning after I closed the proof segment, my apartment felt like a tomb, every shadow seemed alive. I lay on the couch with a blanket draped over my shoulders, heart pounding so hard I thought it might crack my ribs. My palms were slick with sweat, and my jaw ached from all the tension. I'd thought exposing her lies would settle something inside me, but it left a hollowness that gnawed at my gut. I stared at the ceiling, mind racing through the livestream comments like they were a confession, each one echoing in my skull. My phone buzzed softly on the coffee table, and I hesitated before picking it up. It was mostly strangers praising what I'd done, but then there was Maya's name lighting up the screen. She asked if I was okay, her voice trembling through the call. I bit my lip, trying to squeeze out an answer that sounded calm. Instead, I heard myself whisper, "I don't know." My voice cracked, and my throat closed up for a moment. Maya told me to rest, to step back, but her words felt like a lifeline I couldn't reach. I spent the rest of the day in a daze, mind foggy, limbs heavy. Every time I tried to focus on something simple, like making coffee or even blinking, it felt like dragging my body through thick mud. My vision blurred, and I shook my head until the room stopped tilting. I felt trapped in my own skin, every muscle taut. I realized I was punishing myself as much as I was punishing her, and that realization hit me like a freight train. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the sky bloomed in pale pink, I sat at my desk and stared at her profile online. There she was, photoshopped images of Charity, the same manicured smile, the perfect lighting. I felt bile rise in my throat, a mix of disgust and fascination. I knew most of the world wouldn't dig deeper beyond my stream, but I could. I could push further, turn the mirror back onto her until she shattered. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, heart slamming against my sternum. This wasn't just about exposing her anymore, it was about exposing every lie, every facade. I started drafting a new plan. I'd gather testimonials from people who'd donated, friends who'd known her before she went viral, even people she'd blocked after they asked tough questions. I imagined interviewing them, stitching their voices together into one hard-hitting reveal. My pulse quickened as I wrote bullet points on a sticky note: interviews, screenshots, articles, record of blocked comments. The list felt like a beacon, something solid in the swirl of my chaos. But then doubt crawled back in on silent feet. Was I becoming obsessed? My chest tightened again, a familiar pain. Guilt coiled in my stomach. I was ruining more lives, not just hers. I could almost hear the faint sobbing of those paid actors, maybe regretting they'd played their part. My hands flew to my face, pressing the heel of my palms against my eyes. The world felt too heavy, like every lie and every truth was digging its claws into me. Minutes passed in weightless tension before I pulled away from the notes and shoved them in a drawer. My breathing was shallow, and I tasted metal in my mouth. I felt a cold resolve settle in my bones. Maybe this storm would never end until we both faced what we'd become. Maybe redemption lay in letting go of the plan and facing the emptiness head-on. I didn't know yet, but I sensed I was on the edge of something irreversible. That evening, I found myself sitting at my window again, staring out into the dark and listening to the hum of streetlights below. The emptiness in my chest felt heavier, like each breath was dragging me deeper into some unknown void. My phone lay on the sill, screen dark, but I could feel its weight, the constant pull of messages and screens and expectations. I closed my eyes and let the silence press in, like a physical force against my skull. It was then that Maya's number flashed up again. Instead of fearing her voice as I had before, I felt a fragile hope. I let the call ring twice before answering with a soft, "Hey." She didn't say anything at first, just waited, and I wondered if I'd reached her or just the echo of my own guilt. "Clara," she finally said, her voice low but grounded. "Are you still up?" I swallowed, feeling my throat tighten. "I am," I whispered. I didn't mention the plan in my drawer, the pages of names and stories that burned a hole in my pocket. Instead, I said, "I can't stop thinking about how I broke it all." My sentence felt thin, like a paper tear. She sighed on the other end, a sound of fierce compassion. "I know," she said. "But you need to take a break, Clara. You're giving too much of yourself." I pressed a hand to my forehead, jaw clenched. What if this isn't enough? I nearly choked on the words. What if she just laughs at me again? My voice wavered, raw and unfiltered. Maya's reply was simple: "Then you walk away." That phrase hit me like a sudden gust of wind, cutting through the fog in my mind. Walk away. As if leaving it all behind could heal this wound. But I realized she was right. Because in this chase for revenge, I had lost sight of why I started at all. I had wanted to feel some sense of justice, but instead I found an echo of her cruelty inside myself. And that scared me more than any lie she ever told. I ended the call, letting Maya's words hang in the quiet room. For the first time in days, I sat without moving, listening to the slow rhythm of my own breath. My hands stilled, my heart slowed, and I felt something like clarity seep in. I didn't know if letting go would be enough, if forgiveness was possible, even for someone who'd hurt me so deeply. But I knew I couldn't keep piling cruelty upon cruelty, hoping it would fix this mess. I uncrossed my legs and stood, walking away from the window, away from the screen, and into the stillness of my small apartment. My hands were trembling, but this time it felt less like rage and more like the first step towards something unknown, maybe peace. I didn't have answers yet, but I had a path in mind, a path that didn't rely on tearing her down or building myself up on the rubble of bitterness. I opened the drawer, slid that stack of notes to the back, and let the silence fill the space they left behind. That night hummed on, and I closed my eyes, holding on to the echo of Maya's voice whispering in my ear, "Walk away." I headed to the kitchen and made a cup of herbal tea, its warmth seeping into my palms. I cradled the mug, feeling its heat pulse against my clammy skin, and allowed each sip to remind me that healing might be messy, slow, and uncertain. In that quiet moment, I realized maybe the real revenge was reclaiming my own peace. I spent the next morning wrapped in the softest blanket I own, curled up on the couch like I was hiding from myself. My chest felt strangely lighter, but every inhale still carried the memory of my pounding heart. I could almost hear the echo of that last sip of tea, the warmth fading into the cold edges of doubt. I stared at the wall, carpet fibers pressing into my calves, and wondered how many days it would take before I stopped waking up to panic. Maya texted me a few times, first a simple, thinking of you, then an invitation, come over for brunch? My stomach fluttered at the thought of leaving the apartment, of facing real food and real people. But I realized I couldn't shrink away forever. I needed something normal. So I slipped into jeans and a soft sweater, ran my fingers through my hair, and stepped out into the hallway, heart fluttering like a trapped bird. The walk to her place felt surreal. The sun filtered through tree leaves, making patterns that danced across the sidewalk. My pulse throbbed in my temples, each step reminding me how heavy life felt, even when the sky was calm. I knocked on her door, hands clammy, and she swung it open with that fierce worried look in her eyes. She pulled me inside before I could even say a word, and I felt tears prick my eyes. Her apartment smelled like cinnamon and something sweet, and I realized how much I'd missed a space that didn't echo my own turmoil. We sat at her kitchen table, a simple wooden thing scratched with years of dinners and laughter. She poured coffee into mugs that rattled when she set them down, and neither of us spoke for a while. My fingers wrapped around the warm ceramic, trying to anchor myself. Finally, Maya said, I'm proud of you for walking away. Her words landed like stones in my chest, heavy, but real. I gave a small nod, unable to trust my voice. We ate scrambled eggs and toast in silence, punctuated by the occasional clink of a fork. I watched her, noticing how her shoulders softened every time she glanced at me. It felt like a lifeline. I swallowed hard, my throat tight, and said, I thought I'd feel something else, relief, maybe? My words came out in a tumble, like I was hurrying to escape them. Maya reached across the table and covered my hand with hers, warm and steady. It takes time, she said. Healing doesn't happen overnight. Her reassurance felt both comforting and terrifying. Because if healing took time, then I still had to face what I'd done, and what she'd done. I blinked back a tear and tried to smile. Thank you, I managed. My mouth tasted like salt and coffee. She squeezed my hand, and we sat there, breathing together, the weight between us softening. Later, I wandered through a small park near her building, clutching my jacket around me as a shield. The ground was dotted with benches where people read books or chatted with friends. I sat on one, legs wrapped under me, and closed my eyes. The breeze whispered through the trees, and I let it carry away some of the ache in my chest. I thought about the charity queen, about her fake smile, about how I'd given her so much power over me. I realized that power only existed because I let it. A few minutes later, I opened my eyes and took out my phone. I typed a short message to the charity page, a simple question asking for transparency. I paused, thumb hovering over send. My chest tightened, fear and resolve tangled together. Then I hit send. It wasn't a grand confrontation, just a small step toward reclaiming my voice. My heart fluttered as I watched the delivered icon appear. My legs tingled, like I'd just woken up after a long sleep. That evening, back in my apartment, I made a list, things I could do to move forward. Journaling, yoga, maybe volunteering at a real shelter, to remind myself of why I cared in the first place. My hands shook as I wrote each bullet, but I felt a spark of something like hope. I realized revenge had been a dead end, a shadow of justice that left me feeling empty. What I needed was to rebuild, to find authenticity in my own actions. I ended the day lighting a single candle on my windowsill. Its flame wavered in the quiet, casting a warm glow across my living room. I sat beside it, knees drawn to my chest, and let the silence settle around me. My jaw unclenched, my breath slowed, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't feel hollow. I felt present. I didn't know where this path would lead. Maybe I'd face more guilt, more doubt. But as I watched that tiny flame dance, I understood that real healing would be messy, and that was okay. I leaned forward, listening to the soft crackle of the candle, and let myself believe that peace was a journey, not a destination. I signed up at a local shelter that week, thinking, this might help me find some purpose again. The first time I walked through those doors, my knees nearly buckled, like I was stepping into someone else's life. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and I could feel my heartbeat in my throat. I forced myself to take a deep breath, fingers curling around the strap of my tote bag, and I told the volunteer at the desk my name, stumbling over the words. She smiled kindly and handed me an apron. My hands were clammy as I tied it on, the fabric rough against my palms. Inside, the air smelled like antiseptic and hope, if that makes sense. I wandered through the rows of donated clothes, shelves of canned soup lining the walls. Every so often someone would glance my way, and my chest tightened, like I was under a spotlight. But there was something grounding about the simple routine, sorting boxes, folding sweaters, stacking shoes. My shoulders loosened a fraction each time I tucked an item neatly onto a shelf. During a break, I found myself outside on a bench, watching people come and go, bags in hand. I pressed my palms against my thighs, steadying the tremor in my fingers. I felt guilty, too, guilty that I'd almost lost sight of what real giving meant. My jaw unclenched as I sipped lukewarm water from a paper cup. The sting of it reminded me I was alive, and that I could choose to use that life for something honest. A few afternoons later, I was helping in the back room when I heard the familiar ping of a new message on my phone. I slipped it from my pocket and saw an email from her, the charity queen. My palms went slick again, and my lungs felt tight. I stood frozen in the narrow aisle, my apron strings digging into my waist. I opened it, eyes scanning the words. She wanted to collaborate, for real impact, she said, her tone cautious, tentative. She wrote that she'd seen my streams and, maybe, she wanted to learn how to make authentic change. My stomach flipped. Part of me wanted to slam the desk drawer shut, delete the email and pretend it never happened. But another part, an angry, curious part, hesitated. My jaw locked as I reread the message, trying to parse her motives. Was this another manipulation? Or was she genuinely stuck in the same guilt I'd clawed my way through? That night, I replayed her email in my head while lying on my bed. My fingers traced patterns in the sheet, nails digging into the cotton. My heart pounded with confusion and, something like hope. But it was tangled with suspicion, a bitter aftertaste I couldn't wash away. I tossed and turned, visions of collaborating with her flickering like a faulty bulb. I shivered, even though the room was warm, and I pressed my ankles together under the covers. The next day, I took a walk before my shift, just me and the hum of the city. My jaw ached from clenching so hard, and every time my phone buzzed in my pocket, I jumped. I finally texted Maya, she emailed. Wants to help. What do I do? My fingers hovered over the send button longer than I care to admit. When Maya replied, trust your gut, I felt both calm and torn. That afternoon, between folding blankets and restocking canned goods, I drafted a reply. My thumb hovered, wiping sweat from the corner of my eye. I typed something cautious, like, I'm considering how this could work. Let's talk. Then I hit send and immediately felt my stomach drop. What if I was leading her into another trap? My chest tightened, my breaths coming too quick, too shallow. By the time I left the shelter, twilight had settled in, painting the sky in bruised purples. I walked home slowly, senses on high alert, every distant siren, every rustle of leaves making me jump. My shoulders bunched around my ears, and I felt raw, like my skin had been peeled back a bit. But beneath all that tension, there was a small spark, like the embers of something new. Maybe cooperation with her could force both of us to expose real truths this time. Or maybe it'd rip open old wounds again. I unlocked my door, and for a moment I just stood there, phone in hand, wondering if I was brave or foolish. My legs shook, but I forced myself to step inside. I tossed my keys on the counter, let the silence wash over me, and exhaled, feeling the tightness in my chest ease, just a little. I knew the path ahead would be messy, maybe even dangerous for my peace, but maybe that was the point. Real change rarely followed an easy script. And for the first time in weeks, my stomach didn't twist with dread, but with something that felt like possibility. I woke the next morning feeling like I'd been run over by my own regrets. My limbs felt heavy, as if gravity had doubled overnight. I sat up slowly, hands pressing into the mattress, and noticed the drip of condensation on the windowpane. My heart pounded against my ribs like it was trying to escape, and I pressed a palm to my chest, jaw clenched, tasting the metallic tang of adrenaline in my mouth. I forced myself to stand, legs unsteady, and shuffled to the kitchen. The kettle's whistle felt too loud, jolting my nerves, and steam curled around me as I poured hot water over a tea bag. My hands shook so badly I nearly spilled, leaving drips on the countertop that I could barely muster the energy to wipe away. Each breath felt deliberate, like I was negotiating with my own body just to keep it moving. My phone sat on the table, screen dark. I stared at it for a long moment, remembering the email I'd sent to her the day before, asking to talk, cautiously hoping she wasn't luring me into another trap. The silence in my inbox felt like icy water splashing across my face. My stomach twisted with nerves and something like anticipation. My throat tightened at the thought that maybe she would reply, maybe this was the start of something real. Or maybe it was another lie waiting to snap. I wrapped my robe tighter around me and decided to get out of the apartment. The walls felt like they were closing in, and I needed air that wasn't charged with all my tangled thoughts. I stepped onto the landing and felt the hum of the building settle around me. In the elevator, I gripped the rail so hard my knuckles went pale. The doors closed with a soft whoosh, and I closed my eyes, leaning my forehead against the cool metal. Outside, the air was damp, the sky a wash of pale gray. I wandered without a destination, each step echoing on the wet pavement. I passed storefronts with mannequins wearing the latest fashions. Everything felt too pristine, too staged, reminding me of her false charity photos. I shivered, though I wasn't cold, and pressed my arms around my torso, feeling the flutter of my pulse beneath my skin. I found myself in front of a small cafe I'd never noticed before. The sign was simple, just a single word painted on wood, and the glow inside looked warm. I hesitated, thumb hovering over the door handle. My stomach clenched at the thought of walking in alone, heart exposed, but something about the place felt inviting. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The chatter and clink of cups wrapped around me like a soft blanket. I chose a corner seat, my back against the wall, and breathed in the smell of roasted beans and baked pastries. The barista gave me a nod, and I managed a small, grateful smile. I ordered a coffee, the familiarity of the ritual settling my nerves just enough to stop the tremor in my hands. As I waited, I pulled out my notebook, the one I'd started back when all of this began, and flipped to a blank page. My pen hovered as I considered writing to clear my head, but then I stopped. Instead, I took a sip of coffee, then another, letting the bitterness anchor me. My jaw unclenched as the warmth slid down my throat. For a moment, the noise around me faded into a comfortable hum. Then my phone buzzed in my pocket. I reached for it, heart in my throat, and saw her name lighting up the screen. My breath caught, and a knot of fear and relief tangled in my stomach. I tapped the notification, hand steadying as I read. "I'd like to meet. Can we talk over coffee? I want to understand." My chest felt both tight and strangely light, like two storms colliding. I reread the message, no demands, no hidden jabs. Just a simple request. My mind spun with possibilities, genuine remorse, calculated con, or something in between. I closed my eyes, letting the cafe's warmth seep into me. I typed back, fingers trembling less than they had before, "Okay. Let's meet here in an hour." I hit send and watched the message bubble shift to read. My pulse throbbed in my temples, and I realized this moment was crossroads. I could walk away, keep my peace intact, or sit across from her and face the whirlwind of emotions all over again. I folded the notebook shut and placed it in my bag. The coffee cup felt solid beneath my fingers, a tether to reality. My legs tingled with nervous energy, but I pushed back the chair and stood. As the chair scraped across the floor, my chest tightened anew. Fear versus hope, suspicion versus possibility, guilt versus relief. I inhaled, letting the conflicting feelings swirl together, knowing that whichever path I chose next would change everything. That afternoon, I sat at the corner table of the cafe, stirring my coffee without really tasting it. The chair beneath me felt too hard, like it was reminding me that I was about to do something that would change everything, again. My fingers drummed against the ceramic mug, each tap echoing my racing heartbeat. I'd arrived early, hoping to calm the storm inside me, but every gurgle of the espresso machine made my chest tighten. I glanced at the door every few seconds. The bell above it jingled each time someone came in, and I flinched as though it were a warning. My jaw was locked, and my hands had that familiar tremor, as though they remembered every betrayal I'd ever felt. I took a shaky breath and counted to 3, pressing the heels of my palms together under the table until the tremor eased. Then I saw her. She moved through the door with careful steps, scanning the room like she wasn't sure she belonged. She looked smaller in person, no perfectly angled selfies, no filters hiding the fatigue under her eyes. My stomach dropped, part of me wanted to run, part of me wanted to rise and smack her. In that moment, every contradiction in me warred for attention. She spotted me, swallowed, and made her way to the table, each step deliberate. Her lips quivered, and I noticed how she held her shoulders stiff, as though bracing for judgment. My throat went dry. I pressed both hands to my lap, fingernails digging into my palms. "Clara," she said, voice low, uncertain. Her eyes flicked down to my hands. "Thank you for meeting me." I stayed silent, my gaze fixed on her, studying the way her chin trembled. My chest bobbed with each breath. "Finally," I said, "you said you wanted to understand." My voice came out clipped, but I could taste the vulnerability in it, too. She exhaled slowly. I saw your last message." She paused, searching my face. "I meant what I said. I want real impact. But I don't know where to start." My jaw unclenched into a hollow laugh. "That's rich coming from you." My voice caught on the first word, my ribs felt too tight. "You faked everything. You turned hearts into wallets." Tears welled in her eyes. "I know. I played that game, and I was awful." She paused, face crumpling. "I'm sorry." The word landed like lead in my gut. My breath hitched. I remembered every click of that donation widget, every lie she lived behind the lens. Rage surged, I could sense it in my palms, hot and pulsing. But beneath it, there was something else, something I hadn't expected to feel, a flicker of empathy. "Sorry," I repeated, voice softer. The cafe's ambient chatter felt distant, as though I were underwater. My fingers dug into the edge of the table, nails leaving crescent marks in the wood. I swallowed hard, tasting bitterness and something faintly sweet. She reached across and laid a trembling hand near mine, without touching. My skin prickled. She drew back and said, "I don't expect you to forgive me. I want to learn how to give back the right way." My eyes stung. I thought of Maya telling me to walk away, of the emptiness I'd felt, of the spark of purpose flickering back to life when I'd volunteered at the shelter. I closed my eyes and let out a shaky breath, feeling my chest finally ease. When I opened them, I said, "All right. We start small." My voice was calm, but my heart thundered. "Tomorrow, come with me. I'll introduce you to the people at the shelter. No cameras, no streams, just real faces, real needs." Her eyes filled with relief and fear and hope all at once. "Thank you," she whispered. I nodded and picked up my coffee, lifting it in a small toast. My hands still trembled, but this time it felt like the tremor of hope. "To real impact," I said, and I meant it. Early that morning, I stood outside the shelter's heavy doors, heart thudding against my ribs like a drumbeat. The sky was still pale, the air brittle with early light. My hands rested on the straps of my bag, knuckles white. Beside me, she hovered, shoulders hunched, eyes flicking to the sign above the entryway. We hadn't said much since our cafe talk. I could hear her breath catch, see the tension along her jawline. I offered a quiet, "Ready," and she nodded, lips pressed into a thin line. My chest tightened with protectiveness. We stepped inside together and were met with muted chatter and the smell of fresh laundry and canned soup. Volunteers moved among rows of clothes and boxed meals, smiles genuine, voices soft with purpose. I caught sight of the coordinator we'd met. She greeted me by name, handshake firm. Then her eyes flicked to my companion, hesitance in her posture as if she wasn't sure she belonged. The coordinator included us both, guiding us through tasks without skipping a beat. I watched the Queen's lips tremble as she sank into place. As we sorted donated coats, I could feel the Queen's eyes on me, flicking away when caught. Her hands hovered over piles of garments, uncertain. She took a deep breath and reached out, folding a sweater with care. I felt my own breath catch, part relief that she was learning, part suspicion that she could revert at any moment. My palms ached from gripping the fabric, and my jaw ached from clenching every time she made a small mistake. Guilt and caution warred inside me. A volunteer brought over a group of children waiting for hand-me-downs. One shy girl, hair braided in tiny loops, reached for a bright red jacket. The Queen knelt beside her, offering a gentle word, her voice soft. I saw the girl's eyes light up, pure gratitude without the glare of a camera. My chest swelled with an ache I couldn't name. I realized then how little I'd understood about authentic giving before. Watching someone's face light up changed something inside me, too. Later, we moved to the back room where meals were assembled. Hot soup steamed in metal pots and sandwiches were lined on trays. The Queen reached out, lifting a ladle carefully, then paused, brow furrowed. She looked at me, lips quivering. I nodded, encouraging. She scooped soup into a container and handed it to a homeless man who'd just arrived. His thanks were quiet but real. I watched tears gather at the corner of her eyes, and I wondered whether this was relief or regret. My own body ached as the morning wore on. My legs felt leaden, and my spine curved like I'd carried too many burdens. I realized I'd been holding in my breath all morning. When I finally exhaled, it felt like I'd released a little of that tension. Sweat beaded on my forehead as I reached for another box, the muscles at the base of my neck loosening. I caught her watching me with a look that mixed admiration and fear. I offered a small smile, even though my chest still throbbed. At one point, the coordinator announced they'd received a sudden cash donation, enough to cover meal supplies for weeks. The Queen looked startled, then pale. She turned her gaze to me, and I could see the question in her eyes. I nodded, gesturing that this was real and unfiltered. She stepped forward to accept a receipt, hands trembling as she signed. That signature, in her own hand, felt more honest than any live stream I'd seen. I felt a warmth in my chest, the ember of true impact. By late afternoon, we gathered in a circle of chairs for a quick debrief. Volunteers shared their experiences, voices hopeful. When it was her turn, she cleared her throat, hands folded in her lap. I never realized how small gestures can carry so much, she said, voice low but steady. Her words landed with a sincerity I hadn't expected. I felt tears prick my own eyes, tears of relief, tears of hope. Her vulnerability in that moment bridged the gap between our past betrayals. As we walked out into the early evening light, the air felt warmer, softer. The Queen slid her hands into her pockets, shoulders relaxed in a way they hadn't been. I glanced at her and offered a nod, feeling a cautious optimism. This day hadn't erased our past, but it had planted a seed of something new. I breathed in deeply, tasting the promise of possibility. And as we parted ways outside the shelter doors, her heading toward a bus stop, me walking home, I realized this beginning, this fragile understanding, was the true turning point. I woke before dawn, the sky still heavy with darkness, and found myself staring at the ceiling, replaying the day at the shelter, every face, every moment when her hands trembled with genuine care. My chest ached with a strange mixture of pride and lingering suspicion. I slid out of bed, feet cold on the wooden floor, and made my way to the kitchen, where light from a single bulb cast long shadows. I poured coffee into a chipped mug, its warmth seeping into my palms, and I held it like a talisman against my own doubts. After a few sips, I opened my journal and wrote a question above today's entry: can trust grow from shared vulnerability? My pen hovered, and I traced the letters as if they might hold an answer. I remembered how she'd looked at me in the circle of volunteers, eyes soft, shoulders less rigid, and I wondered if that moment of sincerity could become the foundation we needed. But then my stomach twisted at the thought: what if it was an act, another mask? By the time the sun had crept its pale light through the window, I decided to give her the chance to prove herself again, but on my terms. I sent her a message: meet me at the community center tonight. I want you to lead a volunteer project alone. No me beside you this time. My finger hovered over send for longer than I care to admit. When I finally tapped it, my heart pounded as though I'd just confessed my deepest secret. The morning stretched on in a haze of tasks, answering emails, sorting through clothes for donation, checking on Maya for a sliver of reassurance. Every notification made me jump, every quiet moment made my thoughts swirl. I found myself replaying her apology in the cafe, the tremor in her voice when she said, "I want to learn how to give back the right way." My hands ached to believe her. But the ache in my chest reminded me that hope and fear could coexist. That evening, I arrived at the community center's courtyard early, dusk painting the walls in lavender hues. I watched as volunteers trickled in, some familiar faces, some new. I could feel their eyes on me, waiting for instructions. But I stayed silent, scanning the crowd until I saw her. She stepped through the doorway, shoulders squared but eyes darting, as though she were bracing herself for judgment. She wore no filters, no polished smile, just a simple sweater and jeans, and something in her gaze that looked raw and open. I nodded toward a cluster of tattered flower beds in need of care. "They're yours," I said softly. "Planting, watering, weeding, everything." My throat felt tight, but I held her gaze. She swallowed, a small nod her only reply. Then she stepped forward, hands brushing the edge of the planter as if testing its weight. My chest tightened watching her, heart hammering at the possibility that she could still falter. She got to work without a word, kneeling in the dirt, sleeves rolled up, and I saw how the soil clung to her skin in stubborn clumps. Under the lamplight, beads of perspiration dotted her forehead. She paused to arrange seedlings, her fingers trembling as she pressed them into the earth. I watched her exhale, slow and deliberate, as though forcing herself to stay present. The volunteers gathered around, some offering shovels, some fetching water cans, and she accepted each hand without hesitation. Time slipped by, marked only by the soft thud of trowels and the rustle of leaves. At one point, I noticed her hands coated in soil, knuckles scratched, and I caught her gaze as she looked up at me, eyes glistening with something that felt like both apology and determination. My breath caught, and I realized I was rooting for her, not for the charity queen of lies, but for this flawed person kneeling before me, grappling with her own redemption. When the last flower was planted, she stood, brushing dirt from her palms, and surveyed her work. The courtyard looked different now, not perfect, but alive, vibrant with color and promise. She met my eyes and offered a small, genuine smile, the kind that reached her eyes and softened her entire face. My chest loosened, the tightness ebbing away. I stepped beside her and laid a hand on her shoulder, light enough that she wouldn't flinch. "You did it," I said. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. She nodded, swallowing hard, and then whispered, "Thank you, for trusting me." The words trembled between us like a fragile bridge. In that moment, under the soft glow of overhead lights, I realized that revenge had taught me only bitterness, but trust, real, earned trust, could teach me something more. As we walked away from the flower beds, my jaw unclenched, and my heartbeat slowed. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but I understood that giving someone a chance could bloom into something neither of us had expected. That dawn, my dreams were filled with the weight of roots, twisting deep under the soil, searching for water they weren't sure existed. I jolted awake, heart thrumming like a trapped bird, palms slick as I pushed sweat-cooled sheets away. My jaw felt stiff, as if clamped shut overnight to hold back words I wasn't ready to face. I lay still for a long moment, tracing the rhythm of my breath, each inhale a negotiation with my own doubt. I slid from bed and crossed to the window, watching the sky shift from ink to pale gray. My feet pressed into the carpet, the fibers soft against skin that felt raw with anticipation. I brewed tea, the steam curling in front of my face like fragile hope, and I wrapped my hands around the mug, thumbs brushing the rim. The warmth pooled in my palms, chasing away the chill of last night's uncertainties, but only for a moment. Later, I left my apartment carrying a small envelope I'd sealed with a deliberate press. Inside was a check, my gift to the shelter for the garden project, made out in her name. I felt my chest tighten as I approached the coordinator's desk, cheeks hot as I slipped the envelope among administrative papers. "This is for the new flower beds," I whispered, voice thin. My heart pounded as I turned away, boots echoing down the hallway until I felt the envelope's absence like a promise hanging in the air. By midday, I was in a cafe, notebook open, forcing myself to plan volunteer shifts and supply runs. My pen scratched against the pages, but my thoughts kept flitting to her, whether she'd recognized the check or felt the weight of that gesture. Anxiety coiled in my stomach, making each breath shallow. I tugged at my sleeves, jaw clenched so tightly my teeth left impressions on my lips. She arrived then, tentative steps carrying her through the door. When her eyes found mine, something unspoken passed between us, hesitation sparkled with curiosity. I rose, nearly sending my chair skidding, and she offered a small, unsure smile. Her coat hung limply at her sides, and I noticed how her shoulders carried less tension than before, though her hands still trembled when she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "I saw the donation," she said softly once we sat. Her voice wobbled, and I watched her knuckles blanch as she wrapped her fingers around the mug before me. "You did this?" The question landed like a stone in my gut. I nodded. "I wanted you to feel that trust, unfiltered." My voice cracked, betraying the mix of hope and fear roiling inside me. Every muscle felt poised for her reaction, relief, anger, betrayal, or, perhaps, gratitude. Tears shimmered at her lashes, and she exhaled a ragged breath. "Thank you," she whispered, the words trembling free. I don't know how to repay you for this." Her gaze lingered on the table between us, fingers tracing invisible patterns. I closed my notebook, matching her stillness. "Keep doing what you did at the garden," I said. My jaw unclenched with the effort of letting go. "Show up, no cameras, no streams, just real work, for real people." Her eyes filled, and she nodded, lips pressed together to hold back more words. The cafe's hum receded, leaving only the muted beat of our hearts in that small space. Outside, the sky brightened, and I felt a fragile relief bloom in my chest. After we parted, I walked under streetlights that painted the pavement in pools of gold. My steps were slower this time, as though I was learning to measure distance, both around me and within myself. Every breath tasted like possibility, tinged with fear, but alive. I felt the ghost of yesterday's anxiety loosen in my lungs. By the time I reached home, the envelope I hadn't expected to need had shifted in my pocket, emptied, its purpose fulfilled. I realized I was no longer clutching it out of suspicion, but releasing it in trust. My hands trembled as I unlocked the door, but it was the tremor of something hopeful, not dread. I set the kettle on for another cup of tea and sank onto the couch, feet tucked under me. My chest felt lighter, the knot of doubt unraveling thread by careful thread. I didn't know how deep this new trust would grow, or if it would wither. But as the soft hiss of boiling water filled the room, I let myself believe that some seeds, once planted in honest soil, could bloom. That dawn, my dreams were filled with the weight of roots, twisting deep under the soil, searching for water they weren't sure existed. I jolted awake, heart thrumming like a trapped bird, palms slick as I pushed sweat-cooled sheets away. My jaw felt stiff, as if clamped shut overnight to hold back words I wasn't ready to face. I lay still for a long moment, tracing the rhythm of my breath, each inhale a negotiation with my own doubt. I slid from bed and crossed to the window, watching the sky shift from ink to pale gray. My feet pressed into the carpet, the fibers soft against skin that felt raw with anticipation. I brewed tea, the steam curling in front of my face like fragile hope, and I wrapped my hands around the mug, thumbs brushing the rim. The warmth pooled in my palms, chasing away the chill of last night's uncertainties, but only for a moment. Later, I left my apartment carrying a small envelope I'd sealed with a deliberate press. Inside was a check, my gift to the shelter for the garden project, made out in her name. I felt my chest tighten as I approached the coordinator's desk, cheeks hot as I slipped the envelope among administrative papers. "This is for the new flower beds," I whispered, voice thin. My heart pounded as I turned away, boots echoing down the hallway until I felt the envelope's absence like a promise hanging in the air. By midday, I was in a cafe, notebook open, forcing myself to plan volunteer shifts and supply runs. My pen scratched against the pages, but my thoughts kept flitting to her, whether she'd recognized the check or felt the weight of that gesture. Anxiety coiled in my stomach, making each breath shallow. I tugged at my sleeves, jaw clenched so tightly my teeth left impressions on my lips. She arrived then, tentative steps carrying her through the door. When her eyes found mine, something unspoken passed between us, hesitation sparkled with curiosity. I rose, nearly sending my chair skidding, and she offered a small, unsure smile. Her coat hung limply at her sides, and I noticed how her shoulders carried less tension than before, though her hands still trembled when she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "I saw the donation," she said softly once we sat. Her voice wobbled, and I watched her knuckles blanch as she wrapped her fingers around the mug before me. "You did this?" The question landed like a stone in my gut. I nodded. "I wanted you to feel that trust, unfiltered." My voice cracked, betraying the mix of hope and fear roiling inside me. Every muscle felt poised for her reaction: relief, anger, betrayal, or, perhaps, gratitude. Tears shimmered at her lashes, and she exhaled a ragged breath. "Thank you," she whispered, the words trembling free. I don't know how to repay you for this." Her gaze lingered on the table between us, fingers tracing invisible patterns. I closed my notebook, matching her stillness. "Keep doing what you did at the garden," I said. My jaw unclenched with the effort of letting go. "Show up, no cameras, no streams, just real work, for real people." Her eyes filled, and she nodded, lips pressed together to hold back more words. The cafe's hum receded, leaving only the muted beat of our hearts in that small space. Outside, the sky brightened, and I felt a fragile relief bloom in my chest. After we parted, I walked under streetlights that painted the pavement in pools of gold. My steps were slower this time, as though I was learning to measure distance, both around me and within myself. Every breath tasted like possibility, tinged with fear, but alive. I felt the ghost of yesterday's anxiety loosen in my lungs. By the time I reached home, the envelope I hadn't expected to need had shifted in my pocket, emptied, its purpose fulfilled. I realized I was no longer clutching it out of suspicion, but releasing it in trust. My hands trembled as I unlocked the door, but it was the tremor of something hopeful, not dread. I set the kettle on for another cup of tea and sank onto the couch, feet tucked under me. My chest felt lighter, the knot of doubt unraveling thread by careful thread. I didn't know how deep this new trust would grow, or if it would wither. But as the soft hiss of boiling water filled the room, I let myself believe that some seeds, once planted in honest soil, could bloom. After the workshop, I couldn't sleep. My mind buzzed with everything that happened, the whispers of gratitude, the rustle of papers, her laugh echoing in the empty hall. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, stomach twisting between hope and fear. I could feel my heartbeat hammering in my throat, my palms sweating even under the cool sheets. The next morning, I found an email from the shelter coordinator. She praised our collaboration and asked if we wanted to lead a weekend community fair. My chest squeezed at the thought. It sounded amazing, but also terrifying. I knew I wanted to do it, to keep building, but the idea of planning something so big with her made my jaw lock. I called Maya, voice half drowned in panic. They asked us to run a fair, I said, words tumbling. Maya listened, then said softly, "You've come so far, Clara. Trust yourself." Her confidence in me felt like a hand on my back, steadying my spine. My shoulders relaxed slightly, but a knot of doubt stayed in my gut. By afternoon, I met the queen at our favorite cafe. She looked uneasy, stirring her tea with slow circles. I slid the email across the table. Her eyes widened, and I watched her jaw tighten. "This is huge," she whispered. I nodded, noticing how her hands curled defensively around the mug. I felt a flicker of empathy for her nerves. We sketched ideas on napkins, booths for food, games, workshops, live music. Each suggestion brought a thrill, but also a rush of anxiety. She'd suggest something bold, and I'd feel excitement war with dread. My fingers drummed on the table, reminding me of every misstep we'd already made. Later, while shopping for supplies, I saw her pause in an aisle of balloons and banners. The colorful chaos seemed to overwhelm her. Her lips trembled, and she pressed a palm to her mouth, breathing shallow. My heart surged, anger at her hesitation and compassion for her fear. I approached and touched her shoulder gently, and she jumped, then exhaled, shoulders slumping. We talked through deadlines and budgets, and I realized how much she'd grown. She questioned every expense, scanned each flyer draft with care. My chest filled with pride, but a flicker of doubt lingered. What if her old tactics resurfaced under pressure? I shook my head, willing trust forward. That evening, I sat at home, hands hovering over my laptop. I drafted a marketing post for the fair page, then deleted it. My body felt keyed up, muscles taut like drawn wires. I took a deep breath and called her. She answered on the first ring, voice quiet. We went over the plan one more time, smoothing out details until my chest felt a little lighter. In the days that followed, we worked side by side, assembling flyers, booking musicians, coordinating volunteers. We argued over layout and timing, voices sharp, then apologized in the same breath. Each confrontation left my stomach churning, but also revealed how deep our bond had grown. We were two flawed people trying to build something honest. On the eve of the fair, exhaustion settled in my bones. I lay on my couch, trading texts with Maya, who told me to rest. My jaw ached from days of clenching, and my mind hissed with last-minute worries. Still, there was a steady beat of excitement beneath the fear. I closed my eyes and whispered, "We can do this." When I finally slept, dreams danced between the fair's vibrant chaos and the emptiness I'd felt before. I woke with a racing heart, but also with resolve. As I walked toward the community center that morning, I felt the tension and hope tangled in my chest. I knew mistakes could still happen, but I also believed in the strange, fragile growth that had taken root inside both of us. On the day of the fair, I arrived early, heart jittering like uneasy birds trapped in my chest. The square was already alive with colored banners and folding tables draped in white cloths. I could feel the buzz in the air, excitement swirling mismatched with my lingering suspicion. I spotted her setting out name tags, her posture straight, shoulders squared. My hands were slick with sweat, and my jaw throbbed from nights of tension. She looked at me, offered a small nod, and I felt a tremor of hope mixed with dread in my gut. As the doors opened, neighbors streamed in, families, elders, kids clutching handmade signs, every face bright with curiosity. I guided a mother holding a fussy toddler to a seat, her arms shaking as she settled him. Then I saw the donation box tucked by our volunteer station, its slot yawning empty. My pulse skipped when I remembered the hidden camera I'd set up the night before, just to be sure. I excused myself, voice tight, and slipped to where the lens faced the box. The feed showed people dropping crisp bills and coins, enough to fill half the box within minutes. My stomach clenched as I rotated the camera's angle, and that's when I saw her, slipping money back into her pocket under the table. A hot rush of betrayal slammed into my ribs, breath caught in my throat, vision narrowing. I backed away, hands fumbling, heart pounding so hard I thought I might collapse. Every betrayal sting felt new, even though I'd lived this before, but this time it cut deeper. I found her near the snack table, jaw clenched, eyes wide with guilt and fear. Her hands trembled so badly she could barely hold the paper cups. I pressed her against the wall, voice low but shaking. "Why?" She looked up, tears glistening, posture crumpling as she whispered, I fell back into old habits. My chest tightened, mind spiraling with grief and rage the same instant. I remembered every sleepless night, every plan I'd made to trust again, unraveling. A part of me ached to forgive her, but betrayal's echo battered my resolve. Then, in a voice too steady for how I felt, I said, "You're not feeling safe here anymore." I pulled out an envelope heavy with the day's receipts and notes, proof of everyone's generosity. With a deliberate push, I handed it to her, and she flinched. Then I turned to the volunteers and announced, "All proceeds go back to the community, none to her." The hush was loud, then an eruption of applause and cheers, some shy smiles aimed at her. Her shoulders sank as understanding and shame washed over her face. I felt a cold satisfaction, a quiet victory echoing through my limbs. But even then, something twisted inside me, because revenge rarely tastes like relief. I stepped closer, voice soft, "This is what real giving looks like, you know?" Her eyes flicked up, meeting mine with tears brimming. I nodded, hand resting on the envelope still wrinkled in her fingers. Then I walked away, leaving her to face the weight of her choices as the crowd cheered for justice, not me. After I left, the applause faded, replaced by the pounding in my ears. I stepped out of the square into empty streets, shoulders trembling with the weight of what I'd done. My breath caught as I realized I had reclaimed my power, but also chained myself to bitterness once again. The night air was cold, but I felt a fever in my veins, a reminder that revenge never leaves you untouched. With each step, my palms stung from where I'd held the envelope. The paper's crinkles were seared into my skin like a warning. I wondered if forgiveness was a bridge I still couldn't cross, or if this final act of reckoning might finally set us both free. The moon watched over me as I disappeared into the quiet, carrying the echo of betrayal and the taste of my own vengeance.